Have you ever struggled with your faith? Or maybe a better way of putting that is, have you ever stopped struggling with your faith? Ministers know that at any one time, in any particular congregation, that there's going to be a spectrum of belief. There's going to be some people who wake up every day just knowing absolutely that God exists and their relationship with God, and then there's people all the way on the other end who never feel the presence of God, but like coming to church anyway. When I first came to this church, the very first Sunday I was here, one of the congregants walked up to me, introduced himself, and said, "I don't believe in God." I've been warned that Lawrence Park was like that, but I just didn't expect to be hit with it right away. And, and this person explained to me that the reason that they come to church is because they love the community, they love the people, and they love the music. Okay, fair enough. And there's lots of people who are in between those two poles, right? So there's a spectrum of belief that can be found in any church. The difference is that Lawrence Park is willing to talk about that. In other churches, you're not allowed to mention it, right? Generally speaking, among Canadians, some 30% of Canadians now in studies report that they have no religious affiliation, and many of those have no belief in God at all. So agnostics and atheists count within that 30%. More interestingly, even than that, I think, is that studies have found that 67% of Canadians believe that you can be a good person without having any ties to any religious institution or any religious belief. And so we're seeing a sort of shift in society where once it was pretty much mandatory that you had to go to church. Now we're actively imagining a society that could get along just fine without any kind of religious belief or religious attendance. A couple weeks ago, after church, I hopped into my car and I drove out to Waterloo where I attended a conference. The conference was put on by an organization called Our Whole Society, and it was an interfaith conference, and the subject of the conference was political polarization in Canada. Why is it that things are so polarized? And, if you need a reminder of that, just remember how vaccines are received in this country. Right? There was a determined minority of people who felt that they were being forced into a fascist scenario by being asked to take vaccines. And there didn't seem to be much room for compromise in between. And of course, in the United States, we see political polarization every single day. So this conference was devoted to looking at why is that happening? Because it wasn't always like that, so what's changed? The keynote speaker on the Sunday night was Elizabeth May, the leader of the Federal Green Party. And she argued that the reason that political polarization has taken off in Canada and the United States, and the West generally, was because we have become completely absorbed by consumerism, but not just when we go shopping, but in our whole way of life, particularly in the way that we approach governments. And as consumers, you go into the store, you pay for goods and services, you get the stuff, you go. Consumers are not grateful for the stuff they buy, right? You might be nice to the cashier as they ring you out and say thank you, but you're just being nice. Very few of us get to the parking lot, look back and go, "Thank you, Loblaws." We don't do that because we're not grateful to Loblaws or Sobeys or Canadian Tire or whatever store we've just purchased something from, because there's no reason to be grateful, right? From a consumer point of view, we paid money for goods and services, therefore we got what we asked for. There's no reason to be grateful. There's no surprise or grace in it. Okay. Elizabeth May argued that when you apply that same attitude to government services, the tenor of our relationship with the government also changes. So when people see their taxes as money they pay for goods and services, then when the government does something you don't like, then you're going to complain, right? That's very different from seeing yourself as a citizen, right? Our governments were formed as a collection of citizens getting together for the common good. That was the whole point of the 18th century Enlightenment, right? That sort of political philosophy said we're all in this together, we're cooperating for the common good, hoping that individual freedom will be balanced with the needs of society as a whole. That was the original impetus for countries like Canada and the United States. A consumerist mentality, though, is very different. It says, I pay taxes, I should get good services. I should get top value for my money that I put into the government. So if the government does something you don't like, you can get really, really upset and say, I'm not getting my money's worth, or you've overstepped your bounds. I never asked you to make me get vaccinated, so you don't have any right to do that. Right? You can hear how sort of the consumer vision of government is very different from the public citizen version of government. It's highly individualistic when you're a consumer. Am I getting my money's worth? Okay, so I would argue that, in fact, that consumer vision extends not just in terms of our view of the government, but also in terms of our view of our place in life in general, and particularly with religion. It's getting very hard to see anything as sacred anymore because we've all become consumers in the way we live. Think about arguments about whether particular areas of land should be developed, whether it's the Arctic for drilling for oil or putting pipelines through forests or coral reefs. Indigenous people often put up their hands and say, that land is sacred to us. And because we think like consumers, we go, I don't get that. The world is there to be consumed. The world is like a giant store which owes us services and goods and products. Everything can be bought. Everything should be developed. That's why it's there. It's just stuff for us to buy and use and enjoy and, frankly, throw out when we're finished with it. That mentality has seeped into our attitude towards the planet, and so when indigenous groups say that land is sacred, we just don't know what they're talking about. It doesn't make any sense to us. If we're consumers in our relationship with God, then when things go wrong in life, we're going to want to be able to talk to customer service. And things go wrong in our lives all the time, right? People get sick. Kids are born with conditions we don't know what to do with. Relationships don't work out. Our job's terrible and it's sucking our spirit dry. Bad things happen to good people all the time, and we want to know why. And there's nothing new about that. Just flip open the Bible to the Psalms, and you'll find all sorts of Psalms that are saying, why me, Lord? Why me? Why are you doing this to me? The whole book of Job is about that. There's nothing new about wanting an answer from God about why things are going poorly for me. But the difference, I think, now is in our modern age, because we've got this consumerist mentality, we want to talk to customer service, right? If you think it's frustrating getting on the phone to Rogers or Bell to try and get help, you can be on hold for hours with those guys, and sometimes they get back to you, and sometimes the advice they give you works. But we expect them to answer us. But with God, really, no one really ever answers the call in that direct a way. You can't just phone up God and say, why did she leave me? It doesn't work that way. And since that's the case, a lot of people are drifting away because for them, God isn't real. Because what we want is a God who's as real as the person sitting next to you, as real as Jesus was during that Last Supper that we heard about in the scripture today. When his disciples were sitting around with him, and it probably wasn't just the men, it was a Seder supper, so there probably would have been women and children as well. But they're sitting around a common table, which would have been quite low, and they're close enough to Jesus, who's telling them that God is in Jesus, and Jesus is in God, right? There's all that, interpenetrating kind of language that the Gospel of John uses. Jesus is saying, God is in me, so if you're next to me, you're next to God, and I'm in you. They're close enough that they can smell Jesus. They're close enough to see when food gets caught in his beard. There's nothing abstract about God and Jesus for those disciples. He's right there. They can touch him. That's what I think we expect now as our standard of proof. Rational, scientific, consumerist people would like to be able to just talk to God, have some proof that God really exists. Have God speak to me. Make it so obvious I can't have any doubt. That's what we would like. But that is precisely where religion falls down, and we can't give you that. That's not the way it works. So if we can't experience God directly or see God with our senses, then the door is wide open to doubt. And that door is so open that lots and lots of people are leaving, and they continue to leave. Now, all of this makes sense. In fact, it sounds like common sense. Why would you believe in something that you can't see or touch or feel or have a direct relationship with? But the fact is, this consumerist common sense, which we have adopted as our reality, is just destroying this planet. Half of all species that were alive in the year 1800 have now gone extinct. That's on us. We are just razing this planet to the ground. If you measure all the animals on Earth by mass, like how much do they weigh, 4% are wild. All the rest are us or the domesticated animals we raise. We have wiped out the wild world that's on the land, and we're trying our best to do the same thing in the oceans. Consumerism works for us. It really does. We get everything we want, but we are laying waste to this entire planet around us. It is not a philosophy, it's not a way of life that can last. We're going to run out of resources. If the weather doesn't get us, the shortages will. It's just a dead-end philosophy. And it's eating away at us, too. If you look at mental health statistics, the West is the pinnacle of mental health problems in the world. We have more schizophrenia, we have more depression, we have more anxiety. We are just champions of mental health problems. There's something about this lifestyle, this encouragement to be alone, do your own thing, stay at home, shop on your phone, don't be with anybody. That is just eating us alive. It's carving us out from the inside. It's not good for us. And we're feeling it with something like 10% of all Canadians are on antidepressants. It's not like that in traditional societies. It just wasn't. We have painted ourselves into a consumerist corner, and we're killing the rest of the planet while we're getting miserable. So what's the alternative? Well, I think, you'd probably expect me to say, well, we should all believe in God and everything's going to be fine. I'm not going to go there. I think that a better question to ask isn't whether there is a God, but what's your relationship to everything else? What's your relationship to the universe? Because you do have a relationship with the rest of the universe. You can't help but have one because you're surrounded by it. So what sort of deal, what sort of agreement or covenant have you made with the rest of the universe? We tell ourselves that we're independent, right? That we're individuals and we can just make up our minds about everything. But the fact is, if you look at just the material argument for individualism, it's very weak. Imagine, those glass covers you put on a cake, right? Imagine one big enough to cover my body and just put it on top of me. So I've got glass walls around me. No air is getting in. How long will I last in this truly independent state? 4 minutes or so? I'll suffocate, turn blue, and die. That's what independence looks like. True physical independence is a death sentence. We don't last. So let's take that off. Here in this church right now, we're breathing in air, obviously. We breathe in about 400 liters of air an hour. Now, if you're having a hard time imagining how much is that, 400 liters is about the size of a home refrigerator. They're between like 400 to 600 liters. So just imagine your fridge at home. That's how much air you're breathing in just an hour. Okay? In a whole day, 24 hours, you breathe in around 11,000 liters of air. and it looks like this. So that bottle holds 11,000 liters of air. We're dependent on that much air every single day, which is an enormous amount. Now, the air that we're breathing right now in this sanctuary, a lot of it all comes from the outside. We have a ventilation system. You can see the vents on the floor. Some of that air is coming from there, right? It's coming from our courtyard. Those trees have been expelling oxygen, and some of that oxygen has made its way into the air, which has drifted into this church. So if you take a breath, you're taking a breath from that tree. Not only that tree, of course, there's trees all over the place. We live in a lovely neighborhood here. But that tree and us are in a relationship. That tree is going into you right now. And that oxygen goes into your body, into your bloodstream, and is delivered to your cells. And it may live in your cells for up to 7 years. So that tree and you are having a relationship. And that tree is also breathing in carbon dioxide, some of which it will get from you. You're going to leave here. The air from this place is recycled. It's going to be pushed out there, and those trees will breathe in some of the carbon dioxide which you have exhaled during this service. So you and those trees are in an interdependent relationship, one which will actually have an effect on you for years, for you, and at least until the fall when that tree loses its leaves. Now, that tree, to survive, doesn't just need carbon dioxide. It also needs bugs and birds, right? Bees need to pollinate it. The birds are needed to eat its fruit, take the fruit away, have a poop. The seeds get planted, and so that tree stands a chance of growing somewhere else, or the seeds get eaten by some other life form. So that tree's needs are bees and bugs, and birds, and some animals. And the way an interdependent relationship works is if it needs those things, then I need it, then I need what it needs. I need it to have what it needs for me to be able to have what I need. Now, of course, the really big thing which happens is that all these plants rely ultimately on sunlight. This sunlight, which is hitting those leaves and my hand right now, this sunlight left the surface of the sun 8 minutes ago. That's how long it takes to travel 150 million kilometers at the speed of light to get here. So around the time I started this sermon, the photons hitting my hand here and those leaves were on the surface of the sun. We are drenched in a constant river of light which makes life on this planet possible. No light from the sun, no trees, no plants, no life, everything dies. So our interdependent life, the air that we're breathing, the fact that we're alive, isn't just relegated to what's happening on this planet, because this planet relies on light which is constantly streaming in from a star 150 million kilometers away. And if you go further out from that star, you get into the region of the Milky Way, you get into space where there are stars which are constantly, through their nuclear reactions, fusing hydrogen into helium, and then helium into heavier molecules like oxygen and carbon and nitrogen. And it was out there, millions of kilometers from here, billions of years ago, that some of those stars died in a supernova and released their oxygen and nitrogen and phosphate and all those other chemicals which they'd been making into space, which coalesced, became part of the Earth, and is now part of you. The atoms in your body were made way, way, way out there. We exist in a relationship of interdependence with not just that tree or this neighborhood or this planet, but this cosmos. And that is not an exaggeration. No stars, no atoms, no you. No sun, no light, no earth. We are in a relationship of cosmic interdependence. That's who we are. In today's reading, Jesus speaks about himself as not just being Jesus of Nazareth, but rather of going back to the Father, right? That's how he refers to God. Going back to God, where he was before the universe even began. If we could put that quote up. So now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory I had in your presence before the world existed. Jesus is saying, I was with God even before the universe was created. And the prologue to the Gospel of John makes it very clear that Jesus is the human incarnation, the temporary human incarnation of the life force which created the universe itself. That's why Jesus walks on the water. It's our cue. He's not just a wise rabbi. This is God in human form, God the creator, God the one who made and sustains the universe on a moment-to-moment basis. In the ancient Hebrew scriptures, they had many names for God, right? Adonai, Elohai. They also had a name which they never pronounced, which was Yahweh, right? Y-H-W-H. And they weren't supposed to say it out loud. And biblical scholars have wondered, well, what was that? It must have had a sound, so what was the sound of that? And biblical scholars now argue that sound is, it's the sound of a breath going in. They named God as the sound of the universe when it comes into us, as a way of reminding us that all of this is sacred and flows in and out of us all the time. We are not alone. We were never alone. We are always in God's presence, in the midst of an interdependent flow of sacred energy and matter which flows in and out of us all the time. That is who we are and who we are invited to realize we are. And yet we lose the plot, we lose sight of that so often. And yet Jesus is saying, I am going back to where I was even before the beginning of the world because I want you to understand that you have always belonged in this universe and you always will. And Jesus comes as God in human form because this form is sacred. This form is made up of the same stuff and beauty as the rest of the universe into which it is entwined and could never be separated. So, in answer to that question I've heard from some congregants here, I don't want to pray because who am I praying to? I suggest that a better answer is, who am I praying with? We have never been alone. We never will be alone. We live in God's world. Thanks be to God. Amen.